Imagine a world where everyone is happy. A world with no war, no poverty, no disease, and no pain. Sounds perfect, right? But what if the price of this perfect happiness was your freedom, your individuality, and your humanity? This is the chilling premise of Aldous Huxley's masterpiece, Brave New World, and today we're going to dive deep into its story. Welcome to a world where stability is everything, and the truth is the ultimate enemy. Our story begins in the year 2540, or as they call it, the year AF 632. That's after Ford. Because Henry Ford, the master of the assembly line, is their god. In the central London hatchery and conditioning center, we see how this new world is made. Humans are no longer born. They are decanted from bottles on a massive production line. Before they're even born, they are sorted into 5 distinct castes: alphas, betas, gammas, deltas, and epsilons. Alphas are the smart, tall, beautiful leaders. Betas are the capable technicians and assistants. And as you go down the ladder, gammas, deltas, and epsilons are bred for more menial labor. Their intelligence and physical size are deliberately stunted to fit their future roles. It's a society engineered for efficiency, where every person is a perfectly conditioned cog in a massive social machine. And how is this conditioning achieved? From the moment they are embryos, they are conditioned. For example, babies destined for lower castes are given electric shocks when they crawl towards books and flowers. Why? To create a deep-seated instinctual hatred for nature and knowledge, ensuring they'll never be distracted from their repetitive jobs. While they sleep, a constant stream of hypnotic whispers, or hypnopedia, drills societal slogans into their subconscious. A gram is better than a dam. Ending is better than mending. Everyone belongs to everyone else. In this world, family is a dirty word. Love and monogamy are seen as bizarre and disruptive. Instead, promiscuity is encouraged from a young age. And if anyone ever feels a flicker of sadness, anxiety, or any unpleasant emotion, there's a simple solution: Soma. A perfect government-issued drug with all the benefits of alcohol and none of the hangover. It's the ultimate social lubricant and emotional anesthetic, keeping the population blissfully numb and content. Now let's meet our main characters. First, there's Lenina Crown. She's a beta, a vaccination worker at the hatchery, and she's the picture of a perfectly conditioned citizen. She enjoys her work, her social life, and takes her soma when needed. But there's a tiny crack in her conditioning. She's been dating one man, Henry Foster, for several months, which is considered a bit strange in a world where everyone belongs to everyone else. Then we have Bernard Marx. Bernard is an alpha, but he's different. Physically, he's shorter and smaller than other alphas, and a rumor circulates that someone accidentally put alcohol in his blood surrogate when he was an embryo. Because of this, he feels like an outsider. He's insecure, resentful, and he secretly longs for something more than the shallow pleasures of his society. He wants to feel real emotions, to have a meaningful connection, and he's uncomfortably fascinated by the idea of being an individual. Bernard has a crush on Lenina and invites her on a trip to a savage reservation in New Mexico. This is one of the few places left on Earth where the old, uncivilized way of life persists. People are born naturally. They get old, they get sick, and they have families and religion. To the citizens of the world state, it's a fascinating but disgusting spectacle. Before they leave, Bernard has a horrifying meeting with his boss, the director of the hatchery. The director, while scolding Bernard for his non-conformist behavior, reminisces about a trip he himself took to the same reservation years ago, where the woman he was with got lost in a storm and was never seen again. This little detail will become very, very important later. The director, disgusted by Bernard's attitude, threatens to exile him to Iceland upon his return. So Bernard and Lenina arrive at the reservation. Lenina is absolutely horrified. The dirt, the signs of aging, the public displays of religious ritual, it's all too much for her conditioned mind. But Bernard is fascinated. And there they meet a young man who is an outcast in both worlds. His name is John. John is the son of the woman the director lost all those years ago. Her name was Linda. After getting lost, she was rescued by the natives, but was too ashamed to return to the world state because she was pregnant. So she gave birth to John on the reservation. John grew up caught between two worlds. His mother, Linda, taught him to read and told him stories of the beautiful, clean other place. while the villagers rejected him for his strange looks and his mother's promiscuous behavior. His only comfort was a tattered old book he found, the complete works of William Shakespeare. From Shakespeare, he learned about love, passion, tragedy, and beauty emotions completely alien to the world state. Bernard sees an opportunity. He realizes John is the director's son, and he concocts a plan. He gets permission to bring John and his mother, Linda, back to London. For Bernard, this isn't just about studying a savage. It's about revenge. When they return, the director is publicly waiting to make good on his threat and exile Bernard. But Bernard springs his trap. He brings out Linda, now old, overweight, and ravaged by time, who falls at the director's feet calling him Tomakin. Then, John steps forward and kneels, calling the director my father. The public humiliation is absolute. The word father is the ultimate obscenity. The director is ruined and resigns in disgrace. Suddenly, Bernard Marx is a celebrity. Everyone wants to meet the savage, and by extension, they want to meet Bernard. He gets all the social acceptance and popularity he ever craved. He hosts lavish parties where John is the main attraction, but John is not an animal in a zoo. He is disgusted by this so-called civilization. He finds the endless pleasure-seeking empty and the people shallow. He is particularly horrified by the fillies, which are movies that engage all the senses, often in a very crude way. Meanwhile, Lenina develops a genuine attraction to John, but their ideas of love are from completely different universes. Lenina, conditioned to see sex as a casual recreational activity, tries to seduce him. But John, his mind filled with Shakespearean ideals of romantic love, courtship, and virtue, is horrified by her forwardness. He calls her an impudent strumpet and violently rejects her, leaving her utterly bewildered. The breaking point for John comes when his mother, Linda, dies. She had returned to a life of constant soma, as she eventually overdoses in a hospital filled with identical cloned children who are being death-conditioned. They treat her dying moments as a curious game, showing no empathy. John is overwhelmed with grief, but in this world, no one knows how to process such a raw, real emotion. In a fit of desperate rage, he tries to stop a distribution of soma to a group of deltas, throwing the pills out the window and screaming at them to stop taking the poison. He calls for freedom and truth. A riot breaks out, and Bernard and their friend Helmholtz Watson, a fellow nonconformist who writes emotional propaganda, get drawn into the chaos. The three of them are arrested and brought before one of the 10 world controllers, Mustafa Mont. Here, we get the philosophical core of the novel. Mont reveals that he too knows about Shakespeare, God, and art. He explains that these things were sacrificed for the sake of stability. Happiness, he argues, is the ultimate goal, and things like art, science, and religion create passion. Questions and instability, they make people unhappy. The world state chose comfort over truth. You can't have a lasting civilization without plenty of pleasant vices, he explains. Mont exiles Bernard and Helmholtz to islands, a common fate for intelligent individuals who don't quite fit in. It's actually a reward, a place where they can be with other interesting people. But John refuses this easy way out. He argues for the right to be unhappy. He demands the right to God, to poetry, to real danger, to freedom, to goodness, and to sin. John exiles himself to a remote, abandoned lighthouse, where he tries to purify himself of the civilization he detests. He whips himself and lives a life of harsh penance. But the world won't leave him alone. A reporter films his self-flagellation and it becomes a viral Philly sensation. Crowds of tourists flock to the lighthouse in helicopters, chanting for him to perform with the whip. They treat his genuine suffering as a spectacle, a thrilling piece of entertainment. Among the crowd is Lenina. When John sees her, his rage and confusion boil over. He attacks her with the whip and the crowd, high on soma, descends into a frenzied orgy. The next morning, John awakens, horrified and utterly broken by what he has become a part of. The civilization he tried so desperately to escape has finally consumed him. Overcome with despair and self-loathing, he takes his own life. The final haunting image is of his feet slowly turning, a tragic compass pointing to the emptiness of this brave new world. Huxley's story is a powerful warning. It asks us if a world without suffering is worth living, if it means giving up the very things that make us human, our struggles, our art, our love, and our freedom to choose. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into Brave New World. If you enjoyed this summary, please Please hit that like button, subscribe for more literary analysis, and let me know in the comments what you think. Is our world heading in this direction? I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you next time.